One of my favorite Talmudic stories takes place on Yom Kippur. The story tells of a man from the north of Israel who had gone down to the south of the country and worked for an employer there for 3 years. On the eve of Yom Kippur, before he made his trip home to be with his family for the holiday, the man asked his employer to pay him the wages that he was due. The employer responded, "I have no money." Ever patient, the worker said back, "Okay, why don't you pay me in land?" "I have no land," said the employer. "Okay, well, you can pay me in cattle. You must have cattle." "I have no cattle," came the response. "Okay, well, at the very least, you can pay me in pillows and bedding." You all probably know his answer. "I have no pillows and bedding." Crestfallen, the man packed up his few belongings and returned home, empty-handed and disappointed. Can you imagine that? You've been working for this guy for 3 years. You haven't seen your family in ages, and you're going home, and of course they're expecting you to bring them something special. You've been gone for so long. It should be infuriating enough that he can't pay you in cash, but then not to be able to pay you anything? After being there for 3 years, can you imagine? Personally, I'd be pretty mad. But then, a few weeks later, after Sukkat, the employer showed up at the man's home, loaded up with 3 donkeys full of food and delicacies. After they'd eaten their fill, the employer paid the man his wages. "I have to ask," said the employer, "when I told you I had no money to give you, what did you suspect?" "I assumed you must have invested all your money in a business opportunity," said the worker. "And when I told you I had no land, I assumed you must have leased it all out. And when I told you that I had no pillows or bedding, I assumed you'd set aside all of your property for the temple." The employer couldn't believe it. Wow, that's exactly what happened. He couldn't believe it. The employer offered the man his blessing. "Since you have judged me favorably, may God judge you favorably as well." As unlikely as the employer's answer seemed, the man judged him favorably and ended up being correct in his assessment. Our tradition tells us that on Rosh Hashanah, God judges each one of us. On Rosh Hashanah, the judgment is written, and today, on Yom Kippur, the judgment is sealed. After Rosh Hashanah, you might have spent the last 10 days being extra careful to watch your mouth. Or maybe you went out of your way to do something good for a friend or even a stranger. Anything to tip the judgment in our favor couldn't hurt, right? But while we spend so much time during this holiday season considering our own actions, worried about how God may judge them, this story from the Talmud urges us to think about how we judge other people. Our Torah reading this afternoon gives us a guide for how to judge others. We will read, "B'tzedek tishpot amitecha." In righteousness shall you judge your fellow. That seems like a good place to start. Judging others in righteousness. But what does that mean? How does that work? How do we judge others in righteousness? In Pirkei Avot, our religion's foundational ethical guide, the sage Yehoshua ben Parachia says that we should Dan et kol ha'adam lekach zachut, that we should judge the whole of a person favorably. Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, in his book of Jewish Values, explains how judging the whole of someone, and doing so favorably, forces us to view an individual action in a broader context. Rabbi Telushkin writes, when you know a person to be largely good and subsequently learn that he or she has done something wrong, you should not rush to condemn them. Rather, try to understand why the person acted as he did and consider possible excuses for his behavior. End quote. The man from our story, who gave his boss the benefit of the doubt and judged his questionable actions favorably, that is the perfect example of this idea. But it's natural to get annoyed with someone, or to see someone who's acting rude or impatient and judge them for it. We all do it. We judge people for countless things every day. It's human nature. But this idea of dan l'chaf zechut, of overcoming our natural inclination to rush to judgment, and instead judging on the side of merit, that's a quality worth working on. According to the Mishnah, it's one of the 48 midot, or character traits, that someone needs in order to be able to acquire the Torah. These midot, these character traits, they're also used by the Musar movement. Some of you may have heard of Musar. It's a Jewish spiritual practice that gives concrete steps for becoming more moral and more ethical by cultivating inner virtues, by cultivating midot. Modern Musar expert Alan Marinis explains this character trait of dan l'chaf zechut, of being able to judge others favorably. He writes, to be dan l'chaf zechut means that even if we see behavior which is clearly improper, we should still try to look for mitigating factors or positive aspects which might be present. Our task is to take into consideration all factors that are in play for that person. And if we do, we're bound to turn up some redeeming virtues, since no one is bereft of at least some good qualities. Now, Marinis' idea could be a little disconcerting. He seems to be saying that even someone who does something that's clearly wrong, for example, someone who constantly criticizes other people, someone who constantly spreads gossip, Marinis is saying those people can be found to be meritorious if we examine all the mitigating factors in their lives. We may find that person takes care of needy animals, for example, or takes care of a sick relative, or is meritorious in another aspect of their life. Marinis says that based on the principle of dan l'chaf zechut, finding that one bit of merit should affect how we ultimately judge them. But the noted Hasidic rabbi, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, takes Marinis' idea even further. He contends that, quote, even if someone is completely bad, it's necessary to search and to find in him some modicum of good, that little bit of him that's not wicked. And by finding in him a drop of good and judging him favorably, one brings him to return to the true path of his Jewish soul. End quote. Rabbi Nachman is saying that even if a person is thought to be totally wicked, the act of finding and pointing out just one drop of good can be enough to set them on a better moral path. And I'm sure that all of us can think of at least one person that fits that description for us. A person that we think is totally wicked. After thinking of that person, can we really find it within ourselves to judge them favorably? Well, we may not need to. The medieval Spanish commentator Maimonides says that of course we should judge others favorably. But that doesn't mean we should walk around the world with wool covering our eyes. We don't have to be naive. Maimonides presents a limiting criterion for the requirement to judge others favorably. He explains that when someone does something that appears to be bad, the requirement to judge others favorably only applies in two cases. One, to someone known to be a good person, because we can reasonably assume that he or she had a good reason for acting the way that they did. Or the second reason is when the action applies to someone we don't know. Because if we don't know them, we should strive to judge them favorably. However, he says that if we know a person to be wicked or immoral, we not only should not give them the benefit of the doubt, but instead we should be even more skeptical of their motives if they appear to have done a good deed. However, most people, if not all people, are not entirely wicked. But even so, we still judge them, and often unfavorably. Rabbi Dr. Shmuley Yanklowitz, say that 5 times fast. Rabbi Dr. Shmuley Yanklowitz, in his new commentary on Pirkei Avot, says that the fact that we judge them, may say as much about us, as it does about the people we judge. He says, when we are judging another, what we find irritating in the individual is often something we dislike about ourselves. The other's shortcoming holds a mirror to our own. We should use the inclination to judge the other person as an opportunity to be reflective and corrective about our own character and actions. And it's so true. I often find that when my buttons are being pushed, maybe by a family member or a close friend, if I can take a step back and look at why the thing they're doing is annoying me so much, it's because I do the same thing. But I wish I didn't. I might get so annoyed with my little brother for mumbling, or really judge a good friend for being so impatient with his mom. But what I'm really thinking in my subconscious is, oh my God, do I do that? It's hard to judge ourselves. To, as Rabbi Yanklowitz says, to hold up a mirror to our own actions and be reflective and corrective about them. It's often easier to point out flaws in other people than to examine our own. But it's not just unconsciously that we do this consciously all the time. We criticize and we judge other people when we mentally rank ourselves over them. The dean of my rabbinical school, Rabbi David Adelson, cautioned my classmates and me against doing just this very thing, in his opening remarks for our academic year a few weeks ago. He said, quote, "Why do we fall into the trap of comparing ourselves to others? Evaluating ourselves as superior to others is primarily a defensive posture to soothe our insecurity. If I'm anxious that I'm not smart enough, or my voice isn't good enough, or if I'm not charismatic enough, or choose your own deficiency, at least I'm better than someone else." Judging others as inferior can make us feel better about ourselves. But doing so can hide us from all the things we really need to work on. On the other hand, not everything has to be about finding ways to become better. Some of the time, much of the time, we're good enough how we are. We're good enough. I'm going to repeat that. We're good enough. But for some reason, we find ourselves comparing ourselves to other people in the other direction. We envision other people's strengths towering over our own shortcomings. Rabbi Adelson cautioned us against this too. He recommends heeding the words of one of his teachers, Rabbi Nancy Flam. she says to remember that other people are not failed attempts at being us, and we are not failed attempts at being them. Other people are not failed attempts at being us, and we are not failed attempts at being them. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, the Hasidic rabbi who tells us we must seek out even the tiniest drop of good in a wicked person. Rabbi Nachman says this principle applies even more so to judging ourselves. He says that when we judge ourselves, we have to be forgiving. We have to lean to the side of merit. When we judge ourselves, we have to seek out those drops of goodness and come to the judgment and come to the conclusion that we are good, just how we are. So this Yom Kippur, let us learn from the man who went home empty-handed, but who judged his fellow with the fullness of merit. Let us work a little each day on the midah of dan lechaf zechut, the value of giving others the benefit of the doubt. Let us recognize when our judgment of others should really be directed inward, without forgetting the fact that we are good, just how we are. Finally, on this Yom Kippur, the day our judgment is sealed, let these words of the Talmud ring true. Hidan chavaro lechaf zechut, dinav oto lizchut. One who judges another favorably is himself judged favorably by God. Gamar chatima tova. May we all be sealed in the book of life.